Alright everyone, so we're going to continue our saga with red-black trees, and now we're going to go ahead and start looking at, how insert operations are affected by these new rules that were put in place by the red-black trees. Alright, so as we had mentioned, read and search operations are effectively going to be exactly the same as they would be in a normal binary search tree. Right, nothing's really affected there. We still follow the same left-right behavior that we did before, and the things that are really going to be affected are the insertion and deletion operations. Okay, so when we start looking at insertion, the initial parts are going to be exactly the same as they would have been with a normal binary search tree. We still add a node as we would normally. We create our new node, we start checking the values, deciding whether we need to go left or whether we need to go right, and then we recurse down the tree until we finally find a spot where that node can fit in. Okay, but after we add that node there, this is where things are going to start differing a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do after we have added that new node to the tree is we're going to automatically assume that that new node is going to be a red node. Right? And after we add that red node, it could be very possible that we started to break one of the rules above. One of the rules could be that a red node can only have two black children. Right? What if the new node we added or the new node we added, which is red, happens to have a red parent? Now we've broken that rule and we need to take some action on that node in order to fix that issue. Okay, and there's several different cases of issues that we could run into here. And what we're going to look at are basically the five basic issues or the five basic cases that could happen when we add a new node to the tree. Okay, we're just going to go through them one by one. Right, so the first case that we could run into is that n, which is the new node we're adding, I'm always going to denote the new node we're adding as n, could actually be the root of the tree. It could be the very first node we add, right? However, as we noted in our tree and our red-black tree rules, the root node always has to be black, right? And the new node we're adding is red, right? So right off the bat, we've already broken a rule. So how do we go around fixing that? Luckily, how we go about fixing things in our red-black trees is going to be one of basically two things we could do. The first thing we could do is basically an operation called recoloring, which is basically exactly what it sounds like. We will flip the color of a node one way or the other, depending on what case we're in. And the other operation that we could perform is really a tree restructuring or rebalancing, and this is where those rotations are going to come into play. So back to our initial case where the new node we added is actually a root node. In this case, we would just go through a recoloring operation and change the color of that node from red to black. In which case, we've satisfied rule or satisfied condition number 2, where we say that the root must be black. Okay, the next case that we could run into is that the parent of the new node we just added is black. Okay, that node is black, the new node we add is red, in which case, right, none of the rules have been broken, right? Our tree is still in a good state and everything is okay so far. Things are going to happen and become difficult or more intensive once we start mainly modifying black nodes, right? If some operation we do has a side effect that changes the color of a black node to red, this is when we will start running into issues, right? Because if we change a black node, if we add a black node to the tree or remove a black node from the tree, that's when we start messing with rule number 5, which basically says that the count of from any node to a leaf node must be the same, or any count of black nodes from any node to any other leaf node has to be the same, right? So that's the thing we will really need to watch out for, and that other cases below are really going to take into account. Alright, so case 1 and 2, pretty straightforward. We either do nothing or we just change a color. Nothing too bad so far. Okay, case 3 is basically when we look at the parent and the uncle node, and we look and check to see what colors they are, right? So in this case, we added n, which is a new node, our new node, to the tree, but its parent and its uncle are both red. This, of course, violates Rule 4 that said a red node can only have black children, right? This violates that rule. So what we're going to have to do for this case is actually go through a recoloring operation, right? So the first step, and the other thing I should note is that many of these operations we go through may actually result in causing other issues, which means we need to take further steps, and they kind of chain along until the tree goes into a good state, right? So what we're going to do in this case to solve this specific instance is we will go ahead and paint both the parent and the uncle nodes black, and then we will paint the grandparent red. This is going to satisfy both rule number 4, which is the parent, or the red parent can only have black children rule, and also rule 5, which says we need to have the same count of black nodes because we are adding a black node to each side of a subtree, right? So this will keep the count intact. Right, so if we look at this, step 1, of course, would be paint the uncle and the parent black and paint the parent red, right? But now we're noticing that the grandparent that we just painted red is actually also the root of our tree, which breaks rule number 1. So here in this part, we would fall back onto our first case that we looked at that says if the node we change ends up being red instead of black, which is what's required for the root, just simply repaint that node black, right? So we basically went through 2 sets of recolorings. The first coloring we did painted the parent and uncle black and grandparent red, and then because we were violating our rule that the root must be black, we could just fall back on the case 1 and repaint that red node back to black, right? And now our tree is meeting all of its needs. We can check and see that if we check the black height, we can go down to this leaf node here, and we go 1, 2, okay, so the count to there is 2. Count to this leaf is also 2. The count to the parent's leaf node is 2, and the count down to these 2 leaf nodes is 2. All right, so everything works out in this case. Alright, so now we can move on to case 4, and this is where things start getting a little bit more problematic, or you have to think about them a little bit more. Alright, so in case 4, we're basically saying that if n's parent is red, right, and its uncle is black, along with if n is also the right child of its parent, and the parent is the left child of n's grandparent, then what we're going to do is we're actually going to do a left rotation of this tree, right? In this case, we're going to go through that restructuring operation, right? And this is kind of where the complexity of the red-black tree rules really comes into play, because we have a lot of parts to this one specific case that we have to be aware of in order to do this correctly. There's lots of times when I was starting off with these things that I would do tree operations on something and they weren't coming out correctly because I would forget one of the stipulations. So I would be checking for if n's parent is red and its uncle is black, but I would forget about also checking for if n is the right child of its parent and the parent is the left child of its grandparent, etc. This is where the complexities of the red-black tree kind of come into play. Right, so in order, as I mentioned, to solve this case, what we're going to do is we're going to perform a left rotation around the parent node. But what we're going to notice is that after we perform this rotation, we're still going to be violating Rule 4, which says that a red parent can only have black children, right? Because that rotation just basically swaps the ordering of the parent and the new node, but it doesn't affect the color, so we're still violating that rule. But what we're going to do now is we will just defer that to Rule 5, which will actually take care of this situation for us. All right, so as you can see, we just rotated P and N around each other, to kind of give us this new tree structure right here. And then, of course, we would just relabel N to P and P to N in order to kind of indicate their new orderings in the tree. All right, case 4b is the exact same case we saw before, except we're dealing with the inverse positions of the tree. So in case 4a, we were dealing with a right child of a left parent, right? Now we are dealing with a left child of a rightmost parent, right? This is just the exact inverse of what we had done before, right? So in order to solve this case, because it is the same as before, we're still rotating, but this time we're actually going to rotate left instead, or I'm sorry, we're going to rotate right, whereas before we rotated left. I misspoke. So in case 4a, we are actually rotating left around the parent, and in case 4b, we are actually going to be rotating right around the parent, right? So this brings all of the nodes from being an internal tree structure to where we bring all the nodes to be external around the outside. And again, this is still violating Rule 4 because we have a red parent that has a red child, but don't worry, Rule 5 is going to take care of this for us. And again, just relabel N to P and P to N, just to make sure you can keep all the nodes straight in your mind when you're going through this. Okay, case 5 is going to be kind of the catch-all case for us, and this is where we're going to, take care of some things and really rebalance our tree, and we'll get that good tree structure that we saw before, right? So right now, we would have a tree that's kind of in this linear fashion that we saw before, or we use case 4 in order to generate this tree. So what we're going to look at here is, in this case, we basically look and say, okay, is N's parent is red, and N's uncle is black. And N is also the left child of its parent, and the parent is the left child of its grandparent. The solution to this now is, again, we are going to now be doing yet another rotation, right? What we're going to find in most red-black trees is we will end up at most rotating 1 or 2 times in order to solve the issue that we have with the tree, and we will also be doing recoloring in there, right? So the solution to this specific case that hopefully we are building towards is we will perform a right rotation on the grandparent of N, and then we will go ahead and swap the colors of the parent and grandparent. When we do this, we're finally going to satisfy Rule 4, as the grandparent will have been made black, right? That the grandparent's going to be swapped down, so it's going to become a child of a red node. And then Rule 5 will also be satisfied because we actually didn't end up changing any of the number of black nodes in the tree, right? So again, that's a big blurb, and it's kind of hard to picture, so let's just walk through that and see exactly what that looks like, right? So as I mentioned, the first thing we're going to do when we run into this case is we are going to rotate right around the grandparent node, right? So after we've rotated right, we end up with a tree that looks something like this, right? We move the parent up to where the grandparent was. The grandparent becomes the right child of the parent, and then our N node, our new node, is still a left child of the parent as it had originally. Okay, after we've rotated it, then in order to finally fix up our last step, all we need to do is basically swap the colors of the parent and the grandparent. When we swap those colors, all of a sudden, all of our tree rules are validated and everything should be good to go, right? Because we have a black node that has 2 red children, and each of those 2 red children have 2 black leaf nodes. And if we check the black height on this tree, everything's going to work out, right? If we count to any of the leaves out here, basically we end up with 1, we end up with 1, we end up with 1, and we end up with 1, no matter which of the internal nodes we start at, right? Which is really cool that by just doing a couple rotations and then swapping some colors, all of a sudden our tree structure is correct and is actually fully balanced. You can see here we went from a completely unbalanced tree to a fully balanced tree, which is really cool. The final case to look at is really case 5b, which is again a similar case to 4a and 4b, in that we are just dealing with the inverse of what we had seen before. With 5a, everything was going down the left side, and in 5b, everything is going to be going down the right side. So again, in this case, we do a similar action. Right? This time, instead of rotating right, we're going to rotate left. Right? So if we take this tree, we rotate left around the grandparent. Right? So the parent takes the grandparent's spot, grandparent becomes the left child of the parent, and the node remains where it was before. Alright, so we have a structurally rebalanced tree, and then we do some color swapping, and then all of a sudden all of the rules of the red-black tree are matched. Right, so that is basically the 5 different cases you'd run into when you're inserting a node into a tree. There's a lot of information there, and in order to really get it, I would really highly recommend just, taking some paper and kind of drawing out some of these trees and trying to insert numbers and check all the rules as you go to really get a handle on it. Alright, so with that, that's all we're going to look at in this video, and we'll see you in the next one.